I just wanted to say that I'm not looking for fame in here. I just play the Voltaic daily improvement method every night, and if you want, you can play along.
I need to find out what's at the end. I nod to the Titan, watchful and dark, a tower on the horizon. Does it lead to him? The road, will it take me to the Titan? The sparrow adjusts her position and flies a little further ahead, looking back at me.
Do you want it too?
I shake my head. Not particularly, no.
Then you're in luck. The road goes nowhere near him. He stands miles from the road, in the middle of the fields. Of his fields. They're all his fields, actually. Everything you see around you, they belong to him. And I should warn you, he cares very little for guests.
I grunt. Then why did he show me the entrance to the road? The sparrow chatters and flies across my vision to my left.
He didn't, silly. I did. I thought you could use a break from that bedroom of yours. A prison, really. I hoped you might take an opportunity to admire something other than your four walls.
I stare at the sparrow a little more carefully, and she stares back, cocking her head. Who are you? I ask quietly, but she does not answer.
Isn't it nice, though?
The sparrow says after a moment of silence.
The fresh air, the rush of life, of vibrant greens, and the smells of the late summer. What's not to like? Well, other than the obvious, of course. But don't tell him I said that.
She chitters again, and I shoot a glance at the shadowy Titan, watching from afar. So why doesn't he like guests? I ask. This place is beautiful. It's like a dream or something. Some of the trees, these flowers, I've never seen anything like them in my life. I gesture to one such field. It is full to the brim with tall, white-stemmed, flowering plants, their petals large and flayed, fading from orange at the edge to blue in the center. A tree that looks initially very much like a redwood, though stooped near the top like a willow, stands alone in the center of this field.
You know, I've never asked. I don't think he likes to share. Selfish.
The sparrow speaks of the Titan as if they were old friends. Friends after a falling out, perhaps, or good-natured rivals. But I don't get that sense at all when I look at the Titan. The longer I keep my eyes on him, the longer I watch his gears slowly shift, the spokes rolling steadily round, round. The greater the apprehension grows. A terrible and malicious disquiet that draws the moisture from my mouth and redirects it to the back of my neck, to my palms. I wipe my hands alternatingly on my shirt before turning them to the handlebars and looking away, back down the path of the road. I can still see him out of the corner of my vision, though. He's too massive to miss, watching with those black and soulless eyes.
Anyway,
the sparrow says, flying a little higher.
I should be going. Remember what I told you. And one more thing. No matter what your instincts may tell you, I would highly advise you not to leave the road. That does make him rather angry.
And then the sparrow flies up and away. Wait! I call after her. What about the road? Where does it lead? What's at the end? But she either cannot hear me or has chosen not to reply. She's too high up, and she veers off and away, up and quickly out of sight. I'm starting to get a little tired by midday. The sun is high, directly above me now, and the breeze is no longer offsetting the heat of the sun to a sufficiently comfortable degree. Little buds of sweat are pinpricked across my skin, and I need a drink. My water bottle, however, is in my backpack, and I need to stop to draw it out. I know what the sparrow said, but I cannot just keep pedaling and pedaling, can I? That's not fair. I need to stop for the occasional rest. I slow the bike, as if testing the waters, and slowly, carefully, bring it to a stop, watching the Titan nervously for signs of life. He does not stir. Cautiously, I step off the bike and pull off my backpack, reaching inside for my water. I take a healthy swig and look around me. It really is beautiful here. It's like someone turned the natural bloom up to 11. The clouds drift leisurely across the sky. The fields shimmer in their patchwork of colors. I reach down to pluck a flower from the grass at the side of the road. It's like a miniature sunflower, its petals silver in place of yellow. But as I draw it out of the ground, the petals disintegrate at once. Then the entire flower along with it. It dissolves into dust, gray and lifeless, and falls down through my fingers to the ground below. A breeze, a little stronger than the rest, blows cool down the road, and I shiver. Awkwardly, I climb back onto my bike and continue along my way, my water hooked now in the bike's holster by my handlebars. On I pedal, on and on. The heavy clouds pass across the sun, its shadow falling quickly over the fields, and a figure stands ahead, silently waiting at the side of the road. My heart begins to pump desperately in my chest. I stare at the figure as I approach, bringing my bike right down to its lowest speed without stopping. It's hooded in black, a long robe that flows down its legs to just above its feet, clad in iron shoes. Thin, rusted chains hang from the hood, and its face is shrouded in darkness. Appendages unseen stir against its chest and torso, twisting and rustling the robe. It's horrific. I can't pass by it. I just can't. So a good distance before I reach it, a few meters away, I bring the bike to another stop, resting with one foot on the ground and staring right at it.
What did I tell you about stopping?
Whispers the voice of the sparrow in my ear, and I jump for a second time. What the hell? I shout at it as it chitters and flies up out of my reach. What the hell is this thing? What's it doing here?
An acolyte of the Titan.
The sparrow replies, flittering away and playfully twirling around the hooded figure's head before returning to the bike.
He can't hurt you, cyclist. Just as long as you keep pedaling. So come on, ride right past. It's okay.
What the? I don't want to do that. Maybe I should turn back.
Turn back?
The sparrow laughs.
Oh, cyclist, you can't turn back. Not now. It's too late.
What do you mean it's too late?
Questions. If you try to go in the direction from which you came, you will find, eventually, that the road has ignored you, that it carries on ahead regardless of your decision. You have committed. You wanted to see where it leads, you said. You want to find out what's at the end.
I do not reply.
So come on, right on by, quick as you can.
I'm not convinced, but warily, I climb back onto the pedals and push myself off, watching unsettled as I pass the acolyte by. The air around it feels cold, very cold indeed. I swear when I'm directly across from it, I catch the hiss of whispering beneath the hood, but it lasts for only a second before I lose it under the rush of the breeze, and I leave the figure behind. I shoot one last look over my shoulder, but realize to my absolute horror that the figure is moving. The hooded acolyte drifts into the road, hovering just above the ground, its feet completely still. The chains that hang from the hole in its hood dangle softly as it abruptly turns and begins to follow me down the road, well behind but keeping pace. Shit! I shout, swiveling around, my blood running like icy water through my veins. The bike wobbles as I pedal faster, harder. I thought you said it wouldn't hurt me! I shout to the sparrow. What am I going to do?
You can slow down for one thing.
She titters.
You're just going to tire yourself out, and then you'll have to stop. As I said, cyclist, you really don't want to stop. Not again.
But it's going to catch me! I pant, pumping my legs around the pedals, shooting another look behind. The acolyte drifts over the road, following me, its shadow darker against the broken and overgrown cobblestone tarmac than perhaps it should be.
No, it won't. It'll never catch up. It'll stay at that distance and will come no closer, nor fall back any farther. It won't and can't approach, just as long as you keep moving, cyclist. So don't stop, okay?
Okay? I grunt, struggling with my fear. Okay. I look over my shoulder as I try reducing my speed just a little, and sure enough, the acolyte slows too. It matches my speed as the sparrow said it would. Holy hell, I mutter. What does it want? Where did it come from? The sparrow turns to look at me. She cocks her head.
We all make mistakes,
She says quietly.
I was only trying to help. Just stay on your bicycle. Please, keep moving along the road.
I will, I reply, glancing again at the acolyte. I will, but tell me, what's at the end? What's at the end of the road? I turn to look at the sparrow, but she is gone. I look wildly from left to right. Wait, come back! Don't leave me with that thing! But she is gone. I shoot another glance back over my shoulder. The acolyte follows, drifting, floating above the road. Whatever it has concealed beneath the robe around its chest, they shift and squirm beneath the dark material. I turn back to the road ahead. The beauty of the world around has become sharper somehow, bladed, more menacing. I notice more easily the glistening thorns of the roses. The hills in the distance appear taller and less forgiving, and the moss-covered, worn old wooden fence no longer seems rustic or charming, but instead they stand as a warning, a bitter warning from the forgotten and abandoned. I can no longer enjoy my surroundings as I did mere minutes ago. I cannot remove the constant lurking presence of the acolyte from my mind. It poisons everything I see. Even when I'm looking forward, I can feel it. I can sense it just behind me. The only thing stopping me from constantly twisting to look behind me is the fear that I will hit a bump and fall from the bike. I'm taking the sparrow's suggestion not to stop a little more seriously now. The road goes on, the acolyte follows, and the Titan watches from afar. Evening now. I'm starving, my legs ache. I'm not going particularly fast, but I need to stretch them properly instead of just raising them alternatingly from the pedals for a moment's respite. I manage to pull a couple of energy bars from the front pocket of my backpack by shimmying it around to my front, but the more substantial meals are in cans. I don't really have a hope of getting those open in my current state, let alone finding a chance to cook them. The sky, like the flowers I saw earlier, fades from blue to orange. Clouds gather towards the horizon. Full clouds. Heavy clouds. I've been cycling effectively non-stop all day. I was able to piss with some effort and with a lot of veering across the road, but not without dousing one of my legs in the process. Disgusting, I know, but I dare not stop, not even for a moment. I've traveled for miles upon miles, but the Titan is so far away from my position that it seems like he is barely moving at all. My morbid curiosity has long since given way to a cold yet shimmering fright. I hit a bump in the road and lean forward, gripping tighter to the handlebars, and to my right, a blur of white and brown tells me that the sparrow has returned. This is torture, I mutter to her. What kind of place is this? I just wanted to know what lay at the end. This is what I get, is it? For getting out of bed this morning? The sparrow laughs in her high-pitched, sing-song voice.
You can keep struggling if you wish, for as long as you like. Along the road. Along the road. And you can keep trying to find what lies at the end of it, cyclist. You're more than welcome to. This is your journey. Or, if you've seen enough, just say the word and I'll show you the way home.
I'm about to leap at the chance. A large part of me wants this nightmare to end. I look behind me again. The acolyte follows. The Titan watches. My legs are starting to burn. But the secrets of this place, the road and the fields, where did they come from? What is the Titan's true purpose? And the acolytes, I have no answers. No answers at all. My deliberating silence is, it seems, enough of a response for the sparrow. She titters, sadly.
So desperate for knowledge. For the ultimate answers. I've met so many like you, cyclist.
She says sadly, her head turning momentarily to look over my shoulder. And then she is off. She soars up and away into the sky. No! I shout after her. Wait, please! I'm done, all right. I'm done. Please take me home. But I am too late. Once again, the sparrow has maddeningly flown away. I swear and slam my head against the handlebars, grunting with effort as I force my legs to push on. The sun sinks low in the sky, a sky that has become covered and clustered completely with shimmering storm clouds, shivering and set to burst. The scene around me is now a curious one. The sky is dark, but because the sun is below these clouds, my way ahead is quite clearly illuminated in the red gold light of the sunset. I savor it greedily, because I know that it will soon be gone, and I will be left with nothing but darkness. And the darkness falls without mercy. It brings with it great sweeping sheets of rain, and to my utter dismay, more of the hooded figures stood waiting by the side of the road. The air is totally cold now, all around, and as I pass the acolytes by, they fall into step with their comrade, and they follow on, drifting tirelessly over the road. I can hear their whispering clearer now. The dangle of their chains is a rusted and terrible melody. I shoot a look behind. Something comes untucked from the front of one of the acolytes' black robes, just for a moment, but it reveals, potentially, the source of the squirming. What looks like an enormous, spined leg of an insect juts out, cringingly, before retracting back beneath the robe. I suppress a gag, swearing with distress and wiping the rain from my eyes as I squint and steer on, pumping my fiery joints, commanding my legs to keep pedaling, to keep moving, but my progress has become so much slower, and I'm having to carefully go around the growing puddles, since I cannot be certain how deep they are, and I cannot risk coming off the bike. Not now. I can see something up ahead through the rain, something new that I have not encountered before. An old and tall wooden sign with something inscribed deeply upon it. I push my soaked-through hair away from my eyes and peer at the sign as I pass it by to see what it says, but it doesn't say anything at all. There is an arrow that points ahead, and an O, a circle, I guess, and then the sign is gone. I pass it by. I turn to look behind me to see if there's anything written on the other side, but it just shows the same. The arrow and the O. Forget this place. I think to myself, I should never have come here. The night draws deeper. Panic starts to set in. I think about my life. I wonder if I will ever make it home. Whatever may lie at the end of the road seems less important to me now, drenched in this tempest. I think about the days of my life that I have thrown away, the days spent turning from side to side in my bed. It would have been so easy to have just gotten up, to get up and do something, to commit to doing just one thing that entire day. Then, after a week, I could have looked back proudly. I could have looked back on the 7 things I accomplished, instead of the 0. I shiver with cold and with deep regret, completely and totally rain-drenched. I didn't need this, though. I think bitterly. This hell road. That sparrows. Somewhere in between the two, the road and the room, somewhere in between the two would have been just fine. Just fine indeed. I can no longer feel my legs, and my lungs ache with the exertion. Rough and painful calluses form on the reddened skin of my hands, clutched tight to the handlebars. I'm going to fall any moment now. I can feel it. The sparrow has abandoned me, and the acolytes will have me. I look over at the Titan, a dark silhouette through the walls of icy rain, stood alone, all alone, gears turning, smoke rising, but going nowhere. Does he see it? I think to myself. Does he see the beauty that lies all around him every single day through those black eyes of his? I shoot another feared glance over my shoulder. The bike wavers. Or is the Titan too focused on the people like me, the intruders? I didn't mean to trespass. I only wanted to see. I only wanted to see where the road would lead. I release a sob as I force my legs around and around, pushing the pedals down, allowing them to ride back up, then pushing them down again, over and over and over. The bike hits a puddle, deeper than the rest, and it wobbles violently. It takes everything I have to keep myself upright, to keep myself falling down onto the road. If that were to happen, I don't think I'd have the strength to get back up. I've cycled well into the depths of the night now, but it'll still be hours and hours before dawn. Why would you tempt me with this road, Sparrow? I shout up into the storm. Why would you put me through this?
I have put you through nothing,
Comes a sudden voice from behind my ear. The sparrow flies just in front of me and looks back into my face.
It was your choice to follow this road, cyclist. You were never under any obligation to go down it. It's a relief to me, honestly, that it was able to tempt you at all.
She looks me over, flitters down, raindrops splashing off her feathers as she examines my bike, wavering and rocking dangerously from side to side.
I'd really been hoping that you weren't going to fall, cyclist. My conscience could do without the burden of any more fallen.
The sparrow sighs.
This is your last chance. What'll it be?
I push the cryptic meanderings of the sparrow's little speech to the side. The priority shines through like a ray of sunlight. Home! I shout, rain flying from my lips. Please, just show me the way home. The sparrow laughs and flies away. Sparrow! I call out, Sparrow, come back! And a moment later, she does so. She returns to me, lands on the handlebars, and I push on through the rain. Another long minute drags by, and a fork appears in the road. The first I've seen. One path continues gently veering to the left, and the other branch leads off sharply to the right. Another sign stands in the fork. The wet wooden plank that points left is curved into an O. The plank that points right carved with an X.
Take the path on the right.
The sparrow chitters.
The path on the right, cyclist.
With a grunt of exertion, I bring the bicycle around and follow the rightmost branch away from the road and through the edges of the weather-beaten hill. A glance over my shoulder reveals that the acolytes no longer follow. They carry on along their original route, down the path on the left, hovering, drifting through the darkness. But I still don't feel safe. Not yet. I keep pedaling through the rain. The road becomes much wider. It twists and turns between hills and trees, and I lose sight of the towering titan. The fields of flowers, difficult as they are to see in the shadows of night and the ripples of the rain, seem to start giving way to simpler fields of tall grass, of wheat, of oats, and I pass them all by, slowly but steadily, ever moving. The sparrow hops up onto my shoulder.
It was nice to meet you, cyclist.
She chirps softly into my ear.
Don't be disheartened by your time between these fields. Always remember, there are other roads than these.
And with that, the sparrow flies up and away. I don't have the energy to form a reply. I just watch her shoot up into the sky, veering off and away into the unknown. And I continue to pedal. The rain has eased off a little by the time I see the lights. Electric lights of the street lamps of my neighborhood, twinkling orange in the distance. I can see houses I recognize, and the road comes to an end. Directly opposite the place I had first followed it, on the other side of the street. Though I cannot see the entrance anymore, there is only the familiar hedgerow that borders my home. As the amber light from above falls over me, I bring the bike to a stop, and I collapse with it, staggering and stumbling to the floor with a series of thuds and splashes, sobbing and laughing in the rain, looking up into the sky as the droplets patter into the puddles beside my head. It's a time before I can muster the willpower to climb from the streets and into my house, propping my bike up by the front door and painfully making my way up the stairs and into bed. But when I do, I sleep with ease, and curiously, I awake with surprise. Contently, I breathe a little clearer, a little deeper, and despite the fire in the muscles of my legs, I find the strength to clamber out of bed. Why not? It's a wide old world, and there are plenty of other roads one can follow, after all. It was around noon when the rust-coated sign that marked the town's entrance came into my view. Sighing in relief that Google Maps hadn't failed me, I guided my car off the main road and down one of the concrete paths that led through the woods and into Orbita. For those of you who haven't heard of it before, Orbita is a ghost town that was designed in the image of Pripyat, the satellite city for the Chernobyl power plant. Much like its inspiration, it too would have served as the closest satellite settlement for a planned nuclear power station. But the project was cancelled in the wake of the 1986 tragedy. Currently, there are only around 100 people living there, barring the occasional squatter that remains unaccounted for, and, well, something altogether different, apparently. As the dense forestry began to recede, I was greeted by a set of presumably abandoned high-rises, their uniform, brutalist aesthetic standing in defiance against the unkempt vegetation surrounding them, a jarring contrast between nature and industry. After graduating university, I started getting into urban exploration, which conveniently coincided with my passion for photography. At first, I was joined by a small group of friends, but they clearly saw it was more of a one-off adventure and weren't willing to travel beyond the few vacated sites that were close to where we live. Despite being strongly cautioned against it, I began setting out on my own, scouring the Ukrainian countryside for places that embodied that post-societal vibe that I was so determined to capture. I had already built a sizable portfolio by the time someone on a forum I was frequenting tipped me off about this place called Orbita. Given that my goal at the time was to eventually visit the iconic exclusion zone around Chernobyl, it had seemed like a decent starting point. No bypassing security outposts or hopping over fences required. Excited, perhaps unreasonably so, I parked my Volkswagen next to what looked to have once been a corner store, retrieved my backpack from the passenger seat, and stepped outside. The air smelled humid from the recent downpour, which had thankfully dissipated to a light drizzle, nothing my hoodie couldn't protect me from. Something crunched beneath my boots, causing me to wince and look down. A layer of shattered glass covered the street, glinting against the wet asphalt and sprinkled around other fallen rubble. As far as I knew, and also judging by the comparatively decent condition of the nearby playground, there were a handful of families still occupying some of the houses and 5-story flats, which reminded me of old-school dormitories. I had no intention of trespassing on other people's property, so I kept my attention solely on the conjoined 9-story apartment buildings that made up the majority of the ghost town and were clearly abandoned a long time ago. Flashlight in hand, I felt immediately in my element from the moment I walked through the dilapidated entrance hall. The ground floor was in about as good of a condition as you'd expect. I had to wade my way through literal heaps of trash in order to get to the stairs. Some of it looked recent and included items such as condom wrappers, beer cans, and discarded needles. I wasn't about to pick through any of that. The eroding walls were covered in crude graffiti, all of the classics from so-and-so likes to suck giant such and such to abandon hope all ye who enter here. And of course, a few tastefully scribbled swastikas for good measure. Places like these usually reek of human waste, so I was glad there wasn't much of that at least, with the exception of a few suspiciously tinged corners. Fresh signs of vandalism and squatting persisted as I skipped past the first couple of floors. The corridors were narrow and had doorways spread evenly on each side, leading into decent-sized apartments comprised of 2 main rooms. Often the walls dividing them had either crumbled or hadn't been raised in the first place. In the interest of preserving daytime, I limited my exploration only to the sections that looked somewhat lived in. I won't lie. After a few hours, my enthusiasm had definitely fizzled out. It wasn't like I went in expecting to uncover some mind-blowing piece of Soviet history, but I couldn't even find anything worthy of a memento. Each floor was near identical to the last and had been thoroughly cleared out, leaving only mounds of construction debris behind. I was surprised that some of the exposed rebar hadn't been ripped off the walls too. I only had time to explore a single complex, of course, but I somehow doubted that the neighboring ones had much more to offer. Eventually, I made my way onto the central roof, where I spent another hour or so indulging in some amateur photography, for which the gloom of dusk provided a suitable backdrop. Just thinking about the long drive back home caused me to internally groan. Had I not spent the last year of my life poking around in similarly abandoned places that had a lot more going on inside of them, perhaps the trip would have felt a lot more worthwhile. But as it stood, I was pretty deflated over having wasted my Sunday. I shoved my camera back into its nylon bag and glanced down towards where I had parked my car. That's when I noticed it. There was a head sticking out from the window right below me and facing the same direction I was. Though the thing's hairless scalp looked almost human in shape, the neck that connected it to a pair of narrow shoulders was over twice as long as it should have been. I could see its crooked spine jutting from beneath a thin sheet of flesh. It was as if the creature's skin was a size too small and being stretched over its bone structure. Its ears were pressed to its skull and deformed, almost vestigial, but apparently worked just fine, as I saw it tense up when I snatched a faint gasp. I could already picture it bending its oversized neck in some sickeningly awkward angle to look up at me. But instead, it suddenly retracted back inside like a serpent sliding back into its hole. My initial shock gave way to an overwhelming feeling of primal dread. I retreated slowly from the precipice, hands jittering and legs feeling stiff. I didn't dare move another muscle. A horizontal slab of concrete was all that separated me from it. While my body refused to budge, my brain was working on adrenaline-induced overtime. Had it been lurking below me the whole time? Had I passed it by without even noticing? Whatever the case, I would have had plenty of time to process the gaunt humanoid's existence once I was back on the road. I forced my limbs back into action, heart drumming in my ears as I jogged across the outermost connected rooftop. Like hell, I was going back through the way I came. Instead, I recalled seeing an alternate staircase built against the 9-story building's external side and divided by platforms for each floor. I remember chewing, even biting into my lower lip in an effort to subdue my panic as I gingerly cleared the first flight of open steps, only to be reminded of another detail. Each individual landing had a door that led back inside, and all of them were missing the actual door part, leaving them wide open. My chest felt tight. What if that thing was patiently expecting me to walk by so it could drag me kicking and screaming into its lair, assuming it didn't just tear into me on the spot anyway? Cautiously, with my shoulder pressed firmly to the wall, I edged closer towards the gaping entrance, steadied my breathing, and stuck my ear out to listen. There was nothing but the sound of wind rustling the partially peeled wallpaper within. I had to do this. There was a fleeting sense of relief as I swung by the dimly lit corridor unimpeded. I think I kept my eyes shut the entire time. Even if there had been something literally standing there, watching me as I blindly stumbled past it, I would have rather not known. My hands reached for any solid surface they could find in an effort to stabilize my descent. A few of the steps had crumbled down to beams of metal wire, or were missing entirely, forcing me to jump over the gaps. The subsequent floors I cleared using the same method of pausing, taking a few seconds for the adrenaline to kick in, and then rushing by while hoping that the cold tingle on the back of my neck was just sweat. I was over halfway to the bottom, and though I was still scared out of my mind, the feeling of progress provided some much-needed encouragement. I was so close and had nearly convinced myself that the danger was never real to begin with. Unfortunately, Orbiter wasn't quite done with me yet. A sudden force, no doubt originating from the yawning darkness behind me, shoved me toward the edge of the second-floor landing. It was like the proverbial rug had been pulled out from under me, only there was nothing but a free fall waiting beneath it. I never even saw the ground coming. I only felt it, felt as my feet absorbed the impact first, and then quickly buckled when the rest of me came crashing down. There was a cracking pop in my ankle, followed by a sudden surge of pain that traveled up my right leg. I would have screamed had there been any air left in my lungs. The whole world was spinning. I couldn't tell up from down. All of the terror from before finally bubbled to the surface, exploding in a frenzy of raw emotion and panic. I dug my fingers into the mud and began pulling myself towards my car. The rain had soaked through everything, leaving me to desperately claw through the pliable soil in the hopes of sustaining a grip. I split my nails on rocks, uprooted fistfuls of grass, grasped for anything that could help bring me closer to my sole means of escape. Though I was in too much of a panicked state to stop and inspect the damage, I could tell that one set of toes wasn't pointing in the right direction. Shards of glass and who knows what else shredded through my arms and torso. I crawled along the asphalt next, leaving a gory smear across the street and up the sidewalk. Wheezing, I propped my back against the grimy bumper of my Volkswagen and began patting at my pockets. Thankfully, the keys were still there. Operating on pure survival instinct, I had somehow managed to hobble over to the driver's seat, where I proceeded to fumble with the ignition. The sound of the engine starting came like an answer to all of my wordless prayers. The headlights flicked on. I slapped my injured palms over the cold steering wheel and then pressed my forehead to it as well. A concoction of tears, sweat, and blood rolled off my chin. My head was ringing as if someone had fired a gun right next to my temple. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. My vision was getting foggier by the second. I couldn't afford to pass out, though. Looking up, I half expected to be met with the figure of my assailant standing in the headlights, but the path ahead remained mercifully unobstructed, at least as far as I could tell. The sun had long since dipped behind the impenetrable tree wall that surrounded the town. Darkness descended upon me like a suffocating mist. Mind-numbing pain radiated throughout opposite ends of my body, making it near impossible to think rationally. There were pieces of glass protruding from my forearms, which the incessant blinking of the dashboard made sure to highlight, along with the strip of flesh hanging from one of my thumbs. The sight alone left me feeling lightheaded. I didn't need a doctor to tell me I was losing a lot of blood. I had a first aid kit in the trunk, but before I could even entertain the idea of going out and retrieving it, a sudden thump to the top of my car whipped me back into my seat. The entire vehicle shook from the initial impact, followed by the creaking of suspension as whatever had landed atop it began to slowly shift its weight around. The roof sagged beneath the creature's mass, clearly outlining its position. Not that it seemed too concerned with subtlety anymore. Once again, there was a barrier between us, though this one didn't feel nearly as reliable. I heard disgusting, muffled squelches over the droning of the engine. My heart sank to my stomach. By the time I felt the thing's presence concentrated right above my head, I had already started hyperventilating, only for my breath to get stuck in my throat when a pale hand was pressed against the upper corner of my windscreen. It possessed only 3 fingers, none of which looked opposable and ended in bony talons. The creature tapped its claws against the window. It was toying with me, taunting me to come out of my flimsy little box and face it. Even if I felt suicidal enough to comply, fear had firmly rooted me in place. The tapping turned out to be a distraction, however, as another one of the appendages effortlessly shattered through the rear door glass. Shards exploded over the back seats. Something long, pinky, and flexible started squirming its way inside. A final surge of adrenaline coursed through my system. I grabbed the stick shift, put the Volkswagen into gear, and slammed my broken foot over the gas. The pain was indescribable. I shrieked in agony as the car lunged forward. The creature's hand was forcibly retracted from my field of view, leaving only scratches behind, and I heard the distinct sound of my unwanted passenger hitting the pavement outside. I refused to waste even a second looking back and just kept driving. I had no intention of slowing down until I was out of those godforsaken woods, and Orbiter was nothing but a dark, distant silhouette. I can't say how far I got until I eventually blacked out from my injuries. I can't tell you the name of the man who found me and drove me to the nearest clinic. Not sure what happened to my car. I think it's still out by that road, along with most of the equipment. I might go back and try to retrieve them someday, but it won't be anytime soon. What I can tell you is, most places out here usually stay abandoned for a reason. Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that story. I wanted to take a minute to talk to you about this new service called Emojam that reached out to the channel and wanted to feature it on their app. Emojam allows you to send GIFs with audio in chat apps like iMessage, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and other apps. You can also decorate photos and videos with them. Members of the channel will get access to my unique Emojam GIFs. To use it, just download the Emojam app and log in with your YouTube account so that it can see that you're a member of the channel. Currently, there are 3 Emojam GIFs available, but there's one of them that's free, so if you aren't a channel member and you still want to try it out, you should be able to. I hope you enjoyed the video, and with that said, have a good night. I've spent the last hour Googling the name of my hometown. Nothing is there. All of the local schools, all the local restaurants, gone. Even my social media is kind of messed up. I can't find any of my friends online. I can't find anybody. I'm actually kind of freaking out about it. Has anybody ever experienced anything like this before? Don't believe me? Try yourself. Fullerton City High? Gone. Fullerton Middle? Gone. Fullerton Elementary School? Gone. Fullerton City College? Gone. That preschool behind the tire place and next to that McDonald's, which my mom took us to growing up? You get the idea. All gone. Thousands of people, dozens of places I can't find information for anywhere. It's like we disappeared. I can't even reach the cops. I wish that were the only problem. My family and I woke up this morning to a total blackout. Every single house on the block lost power. That does tend to happen out here in the valley, often enough that my older brother Mark rigged his computer to get a connection via satellite. The two of us are currently crouched beside the generator, desperately trying to get a handle on the past few hours. My parents are panicking. They won't say anything. They won't say why, but we have our suspicions. I saw something in the woods last night. Right before the power went out, when it was still dark outside, Mark woke me up and pulled me over to his bedside window. He pointed frantically into the trees behind our house. It was raining. The mist made it difficult for my eyes to adjust, but after a moment, something big darted towards the neighbor's back porch. A thick branch fell in its wake. Then somebody screamed. My parents rushed into the room right at that moment. I guess they had heard the commotion and freaked. Mom beckoned for us to get away from the window. I gave in right away, because my parents can be scary when we don't listen, but Mark lingered there a little while longer. I didn't see what he saw. Mark whispered that he saw somebody running. He said it looked like they were running away from something. My father turned off the lights. I found that odd, and pushed my brother aside. He squinted out the window in silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he concluded nothing was there, just the wind in the trees. Then, the power went out. My parents have been acting weird ever since. During the day, my mom tried to keep us in the kitchen. She made breakfast, lunch, and dinner over the fireplace. She even broke out a board game in the afternoon, and we played for a couple hours. She kept asking about schoolwork, or football, or baseball, or anything but the odd situation we were in. We tried to change the subject. We tried to ask her what was happening outside, but it was no use. She ignored our questions. My father had a wild look in his eyes. Mark and I can't recall anything like it. He kept rushing to check the window every few minutes. Then he would sit down to check his cell phone, then back to the window, then back to his phone, like clockwork. Each rotation left him more agitated than the last. The cable didn't work. The internet had been spotty. There was really nothing to do but read a book or play a game. Mark asked to go for a walk before dinner. I thought Mom might pop the temple out of her forehead.
Nobody goes outside.
She snapped.
There could be live wires on the ground.
Mark snorted.
Watch your attitude and keep the windows closed.
I asked why, and she just stared at me with these deadly, fearful eyes that made me really uncomfortable. She looked like she wanted to tell me something, but my father answered instead. I didn't even realize he was listening. Nobody goes outside. I returned to my book without argument. I found one of my mom's old Stephen King collections and stumbled onto a story about rats in a basement bigger than a man. Time moved a little faster while I read. The walls of my house started to evaporate. It didn't take long for my imagination to disappear down the stairwell in the story, plunging further into the darkness with each step, listening to the untold things move around me perilously through the blackness. Somebody knocked on the door around 10 p.m. After an entire day of endless boredom, I thought this might be salvation. Maybe a maintenance worker, maybe a neighbor, maybe my friend from down the block finally convinced his mother to traverse the minefield of imaginary live wires. I got up from my chair to answer the door. My father sprinted across the room to block me. I don't think I'd ever seen him run before. He put his hand over my mouth. I tried to protest. He squeezed my arm. He didn't look angry. He looked scared. His eyes were on fire. It grew quiet outside, like somebody was listening. One finger over his lip told me to shut up. I looked over to my mom and saw her doing the same thing to my brother. He looked like he wanted to cry. The knocking resumed. The pace was pleasant at first, your typical formal but friendly. Then a pause. Then I was confused. Why were they scared? Why would a burglar knock? I thought that this could be somebody who could tell us what was going on, and it annoyed me that my parents were paranoid. So I got the idea to try saying something anyway. Not my best thought. Help! My father grabbed me by the throat and pushed me up against the wall. His sweaty palm slipped against my mouth. He raised one finger to his lips and held it there. My brother whimpered in the corner. The door hinges whined from the pressure of the knocks. My father reached into his pocket with the hand that was formally placed around my neck. I knew he had a knife in there. And just as soon as it had started, the knocking stopped. The house got quiet again. My father let go of me. It's been hours since the knocker left. My parents still won't talk to us. My mom is sleeping on the couch. My dad is sitting in front of the door with a gun across his lap. Can someone, anyone, please tell us what is happening in Fullerton City? I still can't find anything online. We are available through message and comments as long as our connection holds. I don't think I'll sleep much tonight. It's too quiet. Do you know what happens when you search online for Fullerton City now? This post comes up. I'm not quite sure how to describe that feeling. We are a community of hundreds, if not thousands of people, each with countless stories and worries of their own. You are only hearing one of them now. I cannot understand how our digital footprint could disappear overnight, but here we are. Day 2 in a missing city. I didn't get much sleep last night. Mark spent most of it glued to our bedroom window. He woke me and called me over every now and again. Sometimes he saw flashes of light in the distance. Sometimes he saw movement in the trees. Mostly, we saw fog. Thick blankets of it descended on our house like a comforter. It also never stopped raining. Big gusts of wind thumped the house hard enough to make us jump, but the most uncomfortable parts of the previous night were the periods of complete and total silence. Something about that quiet can really make you crazy. In any given suburb, there are a million background noises at once, even in a storm, even at night. Birds should be chirping, insects should be buzzing, car engines or motorcycles or air conditioners should all be gently humming in unison, but we didn't have any of that. Not a sound but our own, and the rain on the windows. I couldn't stop thinking about the neighborhood dogs. Shouldn't they be barking? There was one in particular, a yappy little thing called Caesar, which never passed up a good opportunity to wake you up in favor of a scrambling squirrel or rabbit. Did our neighbors have time to get them inside? Did something else happen to them? What had happened to Caesar? Mark woke me up for the final time around 5. I tried and failed to shrug him off. I heard something in the street, he whispered. Let's go. I asked him what he heard. Clicking. He got up and walked towards the living room without another word. I didn't want to go. I was freaked out enough. I didn't and still don't need to add another messed up layer to this situation. Blissful ignorance is sometimes the best approach, but I got a gut feeling that this wasn't something that should be missed, and I didn't want Mark to be there alone for it, so I followed him. The hallway that leads to the living room passes by my parents' bedroom. We could hear my mother snoring softly on the other side. A baseball bat was propped up by her nightstand. Her cell phone was at the ready right beside it. We tiptoed past the creaking wood floor and arrived at the entrance to the kitchen. The clicking became clearer by that point. Mark pointed over to the alcove by the couch. I followed him to the corner. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. My father was sleeping with the gun in his hand. There was a window behind him that looked out into our entire living room. Staring through the other side was a giant black eyeball. We froze. The eye darted back and forth across the room. We were in plain sight, just standing there in the kitchen, but for some reason, the eye didn't seem to notice us. It passed by us a couple of times to focus on the toaster or something else. My father must have subconsciously read the tension in the air. He stirred and moved to roll over. When he did, thankfully, we locked eyes. I put one finger to my lips. A sober understanding dawned on his face. He took the safety off the gun. The eye responded to the movement of the gun and in one swift jolt, disappeared from behind the window, leaving a wake of leaves and scattered footprints behind it. The air left my lungs. Something big ascended the wood steps to our porch. My dad turned to aim the gun. This time, we didn't need anyone to tell us. We all stayed quiet. We sat in still silence for the better part of the early morning. My mother awoke some hours later and got prepared to make breakfast, and only then did it feel safe enough to move around the house. Nobody told her what happened. I didn't think we needed to. My father certainly wasn't going to. I got the feeling from the look on his face that he would prefer to not talk at all for as long as he could. Mark returned to his spot by the window. Dad disappeared downstairs to get another box of ammo for his gun. I helped Mom cook over the fire, and we all went about our tasks in complete and total silence. Nobody tried to fake conversation anymore. There wasn't any point in arguing about what was out there. We had enough food, and we had enough water. Nobody was going anywhere. A knock came at the door just after noon. Each of us instantly stopped what we were doing. A sigh of relief echoed through the room when the familiar voice of our neighbor, Mr. Hollow, followed.
Richardson, you in there?
The door pounded harder.
No time to explain. Please, can you let us in?
My father walked in and stood awkwardly between my mother and the door. I could tell that he would prefer to ignore it, but she would never let him live it down. The true married man's dilemma.
Please, folks, if you're in there, open up. We don't have a lot of time.
Mark shook his head.
Please.
He begged.
Jean is hurt.
My mom bit her nails. Dad gave in and reluctantly looked through the peephole. Satisfied with his view of the other side, he slid the pistol into his back pocket, unlatched the lock, and opened the door.
Thank you.
Mr. Hollow is a big, burly guy. He took my father into his arms and slapped his back so hard the sound echoed down the hall. He moved over to chase my mother down for a kiss on the cheek as his wife and daughter trailed meekly behind.
Thank you.
He bellowed.
Thank you. We didn't know if we would see anybody else.
My dad nodded awkwardly. My mom stepped up and hugged Mrs. Hollow tight. A quiet, pitiful moan escaped her lips as she did. The two of them were usually thick as thieves. My neighbor was a nice lady, the type that usually never shuts up, but now she couldn't get a word out. A thin line of blood trickled behind her foot. It didn't take long to notice the source. Her slacks were cut from the ankle to the knee. My dad slammed the door.
Come on, Jeannie.
My mother cooed.
Let's get you cleaned up.
The two of them walked hand in hand to the kitchen. Mr. Hollow sat down on our couch and wiped the sweat from his forehead and t-shirt. His daughter, Alice, perched herself neatly on the arm beside him.
Like I said,
He said while catching his breath.
luckily we found somebody.
My dad nodded again.
Did you see it?
Mark asked.
Whatever's out there, I mean.
Mr. Hollow stared back at him. He took a second before he spoke, like he wanted to pick his words, which didn't quite fit for a guy like him.
One of them got into the house,
He said definitively.
an open window downstairs. We trapped it in the basement.
My father held up his hand.
Didn't feel safe staying there, though.
My father interrupted.
Enough.
He whispered.
Take a break, Mike. Let's talk.
Mr. Hollow nodded in bewilderment. He got up and shuffled after my father towards the dining room, leaving Mark and I uncomfortably with Alice. Alice Hollow is around my age. She's short, with dark hair and dark eyes. She has this awkwardly adorable round head that she covers up with a bow or a pin or some other new accessory every other day. I've had a crush on her since grade school. I know that's probably not relevant, but I just want to point out what may later become obvious. Mark elbowed me in the ribs. I ignored it.
So, did you see anything?
I asked.
Like, did you see anybody out there?
She paused and then shook her head.
Well, what does it look like outside?
Mark asked.
Normal,
She answered.
quiet.
And you really didn't see anything? I asked again. When it started, I mean. She looked at me and shook her head, paused, then relented.
We were all inside sleeping, like you probably were. It was late. Or early. I don't know. My dad was upstairs. I was upstairs. My mom doesn't sleep much, so she was doing some laundry in the basement.
She hesitated.
I don't know what woke me up first. Her screaming or the power going out. They both seemed to happen at the same time. My dad started shouting her name, you know, Jeannie, Jeannie. And my mom was just wailing from the basement. We both got to the kitchen and we could see her running up the steps. She was screaming at my dad, you know, close the door, close the door. But my dad couldn't stop looking at whatever was behind her. He just froze.
Right, Mark whispered. Can't blame him.
So I reach out and slam the door, just as my mom makes it through. And something wedges itself in the doorway.
Holy shit, I murmured. What was it?
I don't know. Something thick and sharp. Like a claw, I guess. It was wet, too. It left a stain. Anyway, I couldn't get the door shut because of it. I was panicking. I kicked my dad in the shin, and he threw his body weight against the frame. The lock finally clicked, and we heard whatever it was fall down the stairs on the other side.
She paused.
It didn't come up again.
My father reemerged from the dining room some moments after our awkward silence. Mr. Hollow trailed sheepishly behind. Who's ready to eat? We ate our fire-cooked meal in relative silence. All four parents made it abundantly clear through menacing stares that the topic of the shit show outside would not be discussed with children present. Mark again asked if he could go for a walk. Nobody dignified him with a response. After our dishes were done and disposed of, we retreated into various alcoves of our suddenly cramped 3-bedroom. Mark and I went back to our room. Alice set up shop in the office with her mom. My mother retired to the bed early, and both dads sat guard in the living room. The house grew quiet again. The wind and rain finally seemed to slow down. My Stephen King novella kept me company. I couldn't help but empathize with the main character. Somewhere in between the tales of rats in armor, bat rats, and albino rats who never saw the sun, sleep came easily and comfortably under my familiar warm sheets. I woke up to a rude shaking. Alice was standing over me. She didn't say anything. I guess she didn't have to. Mark and I rubbed the last remaining ounce of sleep out of our eyes and followed her wordlessly into the office. 2 cots were set up in the room. One looked disheveled. The other was still made. Alice pointed to the open window. Her mother was gone. My hometown is dying, and I don't want to die with it. I know it sounds ridiculous to be lamenting on the internet while the world is melting around me. At the moment, it definitely feels ridiculous, but you have to understand. If we don't survive, which we almost certainly won't, this story will be my town's last living record. That's important to me. That's important to them. I have to let someone know what happened here, even if it's only you. The truth is obvious now. We are being exterminated. This town and its people are being erased. Fullerton City is all but wiped from the collective subconscious already. All that's remaining are the survivors, the creatures, and this story. I'll keep it going as long as they let me. I don't know why this is happening. I don't particularly care. Not anymore. I just want to get out of here. This will be my last message from inside my childhood home. The only thing I've ever known. My brother and I have decided that we won't die here. Mark packed a couple of essentials in our school backpack. The only thing that's remaining is this laptop and a frank conversation with my parents. I know they're scared. We're all scared, but we have to do something. Mrs. Hollow didn't come back last night. Alice only stopped crying long enough to tell the adults what she knew, which wasn't much. She fell asleep sometime around midnight. Her mother was in the room at the time.
She was acting strange, though, you know?
She sobbed.
She just kept repeating the same things over and over, and her face was white. Like really, really white. I thought it was just shock over what happened. The scratch, the attack, you know? I didn't know. I didn't know.
Mr. Hollow was inconsolable.
Well, we have to find her, Jack.
He bellowed.
Me, you, and the boys. Alice can come too if she's up to it. We've got weapons, don't we? We've got a small arsenal here, Richardson. They're big, but the damn things are stupid enough that...
My father just shook his head and pursed his lips.
Nobody is going out there. The hell they're not. I won't risk my family's safety, Dad insisted, especially not at night.
Mr. Hollow's already red face turned a particular shade of scarlet. He looked like he might blow a gasket. Then he calmed himself and delivered the next bit like a sermon.
Fine.
He spit.
Stay inside and cower. Lie to your kids. Keep them underneath the covers long enough, and maybe they won't think there's monsters outside. You raise your family how you want, asshole, but don't you dare tell me how to take care of mine.
Mark looked down at his feet. I avoided my father's glance.
Alice, let's go.
Mr. Hollow beckoned.
Get what you got. Please.
My father interrupted.
Just wait a minute. We're not staying.
Mr. Hollow finished.
You're not convincing me to abandon my wife out there. You know me better than that, Jack.
My father reached out and handed him a gun.
We have extra.
He paused.
You'll need it more.
Mr. Hollow nodded awkwardly. He took the pistol and stuffed it into an oversized coat pocket before turning and heading for the door. My mom met him there with some bread and other things stuffed into a plastic bag. There wasn't much, but I think she felt like she had to do something, and she looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. Alice reached out and gave me a warm hug. She held on longer than expected. Right around that time, I really wished she would stay, not because of my feelings for her, but because a piece of each of us knew what would happen next. It all just happened so fast.
Thank you for your hospitality.
Mr. Hollow shook each of our hands one last time. My father opened the door for him. Without another word, the pair descended the front porch into a thick evening fog. Alice turned back to wave. Then she turned around, and they were gone. My father shut the door. Dad shuffled back to the couch and collapsed. Mom waited at the door like they might change their minds. Mark perched at the window. He looked over and shook his head at me as if to say, "Not good." Just as an all too familiar clicking echoed down the block. I could feel my body instinctively tensing. I had no true preparation for what came next. The sound started quietly before it seemed to fill the air. Soon, it was as if 1,000 crickets suddenly invaded Fullerton and all decided to chirp at the same time. The ringing, awful cacophony of it was deafening. Somebody outside screamed. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. The chirping erupted even louder and seemed to devour their voice. My father held his head in his hands. He motioned for us to block our ears. My mother started to cry. Underneath the clicking, underneath the screams, one word became clearer as it was repeated over and over again in the distance.
Jeannie! Jeannie! Jeannie!
The gun went off soon after.
Jeannie!
One shot at first, then 2, 3, 4 in quick succession. Somebody else started screaming. I knew that had to be Alice. The pain behind the screams made my stomach turn. The gun went off one more time.
Jeannie!
The clicking dissipated. The screams stopped. And then, it was quiet again. My father got up and quietly led my brother away from the window. Mom fell to a heap in front of the couch. I could feel the tears forming in the corner of my eyes and desperately fought them back.
You knew this would happen.
I accused my dad.
Why did you let her go?
He stared back at me. His eyes were cold.
You knew they would die, and you just sent them out anyway.
Heavy footsteps echoed on the porch. My mother couldn't control her sobs. My father dropped onto the floor to silence her. It was no use. The two of them ended up in this awkward wrestling embrace. The pounding outside continued.
We killed them,
Mark whimpered.
and now they're going to kill us.
Then, the office window.
They're checking for weaknesses,
Mark whispered.
trying to find a way in.
The sound ascended to the roof. Heavy footsteps paced back and forth above us. The chimney kicked back smoke.
It's too small.
My father murmured. They can't fit. Please, God, they can't fit. My mother wrapped her arms around her head. The knocking surrounded us. There had to be a dozen of them, all checking various points of entry, all clicking their disturbingly loud song in unison. Staying quiet would be no use. They had to know we were inside. Mark gestured for me to look through the peephole. I squinted and noticed something in the distance. It was still dark, but the sun started to rise on the horizon, and with it came a few tentative beads of light which softly illuminated the neighborhood. I realized I was staring at the home of Yappy Caesar. Standing in front of it was something I hoped to never see again. The creature stood at least 2 to 3 times the height of a man. It held itself up on 2 massive legs that bent wildly at the knee, almost like pincers, and behind it were smaller legs that trailed behind sort of uselessly. I thought at the time that they looked like fins. One of the bent legs reached out at my neighbor's glass. There was a moment's pause. Their window opened. I had to fight my instincts as a woman leaned outside as if to greet the creature, which gently took her into its hind legs and rambled down the hill. The unrelenting clicking soon gave way to the scurrying of heavy footsteps. A massive weight lifted itself off our roof. The sun came up. We were alone again. We have to leave today. We can't take no for an answer. We have no choice. These things know we're here. They will get inside tonight. If I don't make it, you know what happened, but please, wish me luck. I feel better knowing that some trace of my town will live on here. Signed, respectively, Mark 12 Penn Court, Fullerton City, New Jersey. I can hardly describe driving through the complete devastation of my hometown. We passed dozens of familiar homes from over the years. Some of them had bullet holes, some had bent frames or broken glass, some had dead bodies in their front yards. And I tried not to look at those too long, because I knew the faces. But it's hard to stop yourself from looking once you start, you know? I saw Alice, I saw Mr. Hollow, I saw neighbors, I saw friends. Some of them died running, some died fighting, but all of them seemed to end up the same way, in scattered bits and pieces, cast like trash, almost decorating their own immaculately made front lawns. My father drove the car. Only one road led us out of town, but it passed through a few hiccups along the way. The supermarket on Grand Street sat behind 2 apartment complexes that tended to be crowded. The gas station on Main would allow us to fill up, but they didn't call it Main for nothing, and more people would almost certainly lead to more problems. All of these issues swirled around my head in unison, with the backdrop of my entire town carved up like origamis right in front of my face. And my dad didn't even seem fazed by it. He actually hummed for the first 10 minutes of the drive. My dad is not the type to hum. At first, I thought it might be a nervous thing, but then my mother started to join him. Guys? Mark glued himself to the car window. He wouldn't look at me, not even a shared glance of misery. I knew from his reaction that something bad was about to happen. I guess I just didn't want to admit it to myself. Dad? My father slowed down around the grocery store. He pulled into the lot unceremoniously, as if it were any other Tuesday, while the corpses of our neighbors lined the streets among us, clearly baking in the heat of the rising sun. I actually thought we hit one of them. What are